What's up now? We've got another video. These nerdy students took Vegas for millions. Alright, we got a video by Crumb here. I think this is the first one on the channel by Crumb. So, you know what? Let's dive into it.
In the corner of the smoky casino floor, a young woman in a sleek dress casually flipped her chips on the blackjack table, while a teammate, disguised in a wheelchair, pretended to roll by. They exchanged only the faintest nod. To onlookers, it was meaningless. To the MIT blackjack team, it was a green light to go all in. Across the room, a dealer glanced up suspiciously. He'd seen plenty of big bettors, but something about these college kids was off. He could swear he saw this guy before, but walking. Even stranger, they placed huge bets at exactly the right moment, time and time again. The truth was, these students weren't relying on luck. They had mathematics on their side, had come up with an advanced system, secret signals, disguises, and meticulously rehearsed drills. Everything they needed to beat the house and walk away with a fortune. They had to be careful. One wrong move and the entire table could be blacklisted from every casino in Vegas. In a single weekend, they could pocket hundreds of thousands of dollars. And before anyone could catch on, these nerdy college kids would already be boarding a red-eye back to class in Cambridge for Monday morning. Little did the casinos know this was only the beginning of one of the most successful card counting operations the gambling world had ever seen. JP Masser and his group of friends were all enrolled in the course, How to Gamble If You Must, at the prestigious MIT. The class was dedicated to, quote, demystifying the casino through statistics. While the main focus was more about logic and numbers than gambling, JP and friends emerged really only caring about one thing: winning. See, the professor had told them how bad of an idea gambling was because statistically the odds are not in your favor. Some games are worse than others, but on average, only 95 to 80% of the player's money is ever actually returned to them. For every dollar you get in, you get 80 cents back. But he said that one game could be different. Blackjack. It was theoretically possible that a player could win consistently, but only if they had the right strategy. JP was skeptical of this professor's claim. It sounded too good to be true. He needed cold, hard proof. Luckily, JP was a grad student, earning his master's in computer science, so he headed down to the Lincoln Lab in Lexington, which at the time was home to a giant mainframe computer. He spent a long time writing a program to model the professor's theory and to run a Monte Carlo experiment against it. Essentially, play hundreds of thousands of hands of blackjack automatically using this system to see what the outcome would be. And he came to a shocking realization. If you did play enough hands with enough players willing to signal other players about their hands, it was possible for the player to win more hands than they would lose, i.e. he could make a lot of money. But JP knew this was still just a theory. Just because it worked on the computer didn't mean that it would actually work in practice. There's a lot of other factors that exist in a real casino that his program couldn't account for. This meant that in order to truly test the theory, they'd need to hit up the casinos and put their own money on the line. So JP used his findings to convince his ragtag team of fellow MIT students to pack up their bags and head down to Las Vegas of the East Coast.
Is this what that movie was based on?
We are going to be millionaires, the students thought to themselves as they entered the casino capital of New Jersey. But unfortunately,
Counting Cards movie, I think. Or is it Now You See Me? Counting Cards movie. Let's see, what is this? Was it Now You See Me? Oh, 21. I was right. Oh, it was 21. Is that what this one was based on? I want to say it is MIT Brightest Minds. This had to be. This is probably what that movie was based on.
didn't work out as planned. The unorganized group of students lost just about everything they walked in with. Following the trip, many of these guys gave up blackjack. They graduated, left MIT, went on with their lives. But not JP. Instead, he stayed in Cambridge and continued to pursue blackjack and the art of card counting. He knew he had something special here, but now he had another problem. He didn't have a team. So he decided to start his own blackjack course. He plastered posters around campus, hoping to attract new players. What he didn't expect was to catch the eye of a professional poker player named Dave. Dave offered to give JP $5,000 to go back to Atlantic City one more time to test out their theory. So once again, JP and whatever MIT students he could find made the trek down in December of '79. And the timing couldn't be any more perfect because the New Jersey Casino Commission had just recently made it illegal for Atlantic City casinos to ban card counters. So if JP and his friends started earning too much money, the casinos couldn't stop them from coming back. And this trip was much more promising than the first. So the group went back home, heads a little higher this time, and continued to pick up players during the January class that JP was teaching. They continued to go back and play for the rest of that semester, took the $5,000 they started with and turned it into $20,000, which wasn't too shabby. But at this point, the group was less of a team and more like random people playing blackjack while using similar strategies and sharing money. There was no structure, no real consistency, but that was all about to change when JP met a man named Bill Kaplan. Bill Kaplan was a fellow blackjack player. When he read a book about card counting, he decided to take a gap year from Harvard Business School to test out his mathematical model in Sin City. He traveled there with just $2,000 to his name. When he came back 9 months later, had $40,000. But Harvard Business School didn't want him back. They had caught wind of all his degenerate gambling and decided to revoke his acceptance. But Bill wasn't one to take no for an answer, so he fought the school, saying that this wasn't gambling at all. But we've analyzed the game down to the point that there's no risk. If you play this right, you have the advantage. Therefore, it's no different than any other business. I don't know if Bill was lucky or just one heck of a salesman, but Harvard heard him out. He managed to convince them that his interest in gambling was not just a dangerous hobby, but instead an academic pursuit.
What people say about this.
He went on to graduate from Harvard with his business degree, but the whole time he kept up with this blackjack hobby. One evening, Bill was in a Chinese restaurant in Cambridge when JP overheard him talking about his time in Sin City. Immediately, JP approached Bill to chat about their shared interest in card counting, only to learn that Bill was up to the same thing. He was already managing a successful card counting team. The two realized they had a symbiotic relationship going on. Bill understood business and managing people, and JP, he was a computer science guy. He knew about math and creating algorithms and running statistical models. Soon enough, JP was asking Bill to help manage his own team of MIT students. He invited Bill to one of their Atlantic City runs so he could get a chance to see how their team was currently working. Bill quickly realized that they needed a lot of work. Everyone was using their own strategies, and instead of focusing on beating the casino, they were all arguing on whose system was more effective. Nonetheless, Bill could tell that this team had a lot of potential, so he agreed to help manage them, but with one catch. The team had to become a lot more organized. No more individual methods, no more complicated theories. The team needed to stick to one strategy and get really good at it. This was a huge change for a team that was previously very relaxed and low-key. A lot of the members weren't exactly very happy with the new structure, but they decided to take the chance on Bill and a stricter way of running things. And thus, the MIT Blackjack team was officially formed. The new and improved MIT Blackjack team officially started on August 1st, 1980. They had 10 players and $89,000 to play with. The money was collected from both outside investors and the players. Within the first 3 months, they managed to double that investment. This meant they were profiting $162 an hour. In their model, they had projected a rate of $170 an hour. They were right on target. Per the terms of the investment offering, players and investors split the profit, with players paid in proportion to their playing hours and computer-simulated win rates. The players, mostly undergraduates, earned on average over $80 an hour, while investors, adjusted for an annualized return rate, were making over 250% on their investment. Clearly, this team was onto something big. Within 4 years, they had grown to 35 players and had a capitalization of $350,000. But the casinos were starting to catch on to the dream team, forcing Bill Kaplan to come to an early retirement. It got to the point where he was followed around every casino.
The scariest time for me was when I was actually out in Las Vegas, and this was late 1970s, when the casinos were at that time not public companies yet.
You gotta learn to stay quiet, bro.
And I was playing in one of the casinos and winning pretty heavily. And the pit boss came up to me and taps me on the shoulder, and he says, you know, you've got some pretty nice hands there. And I said,
really nice hands.
I guess I'm just getting pretty lucky, you know, I don't know, I just seem to be pulling some great hands. And he says, no, I don't mean your cards, I'm talking about your hands. And I kind of looked at him like I honestly had no idea what he was saying.
That's what I thought
he said, you know, if you had no fingers, you'd have a pretty hard time playing this game, wouldn't you?
Oh, snap.
And honestly, I was just out of college, and I kind of looked at him and just got out of there as fast as I could.
So he hung up his gambling hat. He was going to focus exclusively on real estate investing. But just because Bill was down for the count doesn't mean the rest of the team
said, "I'm
gave up.
outta here."
They just had to get a little more creative, be a little more careful. Leadership was handed over to JP along with John Chang and Bill Rubin. Over 70 people played on the MIT blackjack
I can never be
between
mad at people who
1979
cheat,
and 1989. At times, the return on investment hit 300%. Just to put that into perspective, a good stock investment returns only 10% a year, and even that's a little high. Now, unfortunately, the total profit during this time period has never been properly documented publicly, but it was clearly very lucrative, especially when you consider that this was the 80s. The average cost of a Big Mac was $1.50. But the craziest part about all of this is that the MIT blackjack team hadn't even reached the height of their potential yet, because on February 15th, 1992, a brand new casino opened just across the Connecticut border, the Foxwood. This brand new casino was a huge deal. It was the first legal casino to open in Connecticut, and even more importantly for the MIT kids, it was only a 2-hour drive away from campus. Now that still seems like a long time to drive to a casino, but up to this point they had been spending up to 7 hours to go down to Atlantic City or taking actual cross-country trips to Sin City. This was the perfect storm for the MIT blackjack team.
To profit ratio, it's okay.
With this news, JP Master and veteran member John Chang re-engaged Bill Kaplan to help give the team an all-new structure. For this new run, they decided to form a limited partnership in April of '92 called Strategic Investments. Bill Kaplan structured this partnership similar to the real estate development limited partnerships that he knew and loved. 40 shares at $25,000 a pop for a total investment of $1 million. Friends and partners who had seen big returns on their previous investments lined up to fund this new company. There was just one thing missing: the players. Throughout the 80s, despite how well they were doing, the MIT blackjack team suffered extreme burnout. Players again got bored with blackjack and wanted to do other things like actually start a family or put their MIT degrees to use. So JP, Bill, and John had to again recruit a lot of new people and fast. They put up flyers around campus advertising the blackjack team as the perfect summer job. The new structure did not require the students to put any money into the pot, so it was a great opportunity for college students who needed some extra cash. But joining the team was a lot harder than just attending a few meetings here and there. Each interested recruit had to prove their talent. Hours of daily practices for months on end. First, the players had to learn basic strategy, as first seen in Edward Thorpe's book, Beat the Dealer. Thorpe had come to his conclusions, much like JP, through intense mathematics and computer analysis of the game, but it all boiled down to this chart right here, and this was the first thing the players had to memorize. It tells you what move you as the player should do in response to whatever card the dealer has drawn. But this, of course, wasn't the only strategy that the MIT blackjack team employed. They were a lot more sophisticated than that. They also had to learn the high and low method of card counting. This also requires a bunch of mental math, but can be taught with this chart. It essentially boils down to keeping track of what cards have already been dealt and betting accordingly. If there's more low-value cards left in the deck, you bet less, and if there's more high-value cards left, you bet more. But believe it or not, memorizing all the charts and figuring out the math behind blackjack was the easy part. The hardest part of training was learning how to do it as a team. Only worked if it was done as a team. The members were split up into 3 different players: the big player, the controller, and the spotter. The spotter's job was to count the cards in the deck and wait for the count to be favorable to bet on. Then, he'll do some sort of obscure signal like adjust his tie or fix his hair in a certain way, a sign that only someone on the team could notice. Then, a controller, after noticing the signal, sits down to confirm the count. And finally, once the count is confirmed, they call in the big player. One of these was student Mike Aponte, then 22 years old. After perfecting the technique in empty classrooms, he was shocked to be handed $40,000 in cash to gamble with on behalf of the team. He was even more shocked to lose $10,000 in his very first 10 minutes at the blackjack table in Atlantic City as the big player. It was a lesson in just how volatile blackjack could be, even with a scientifically proven system. But he continued to rely on the team's methods, placed big hands while the count was still favorable. By the end of the weekend, he was able to return to the college with a net profit of about $25,000. But we're getting a little ahead of ourselves here. So once the card counting hopefuls had gone through these weeks of endless practice, they had to make one final test. Called it the checkout. It's pretty easy to learn how to count alone in a study room at the MIT library, but casinos have a completely different environment. Casinos are incredibly loud. The air is filled with cigarette smoke. When you're making big bets, you get a lot of attention. Everyone around you is drunk. Table is filled with people you don't know. All of these factors can throw off that really hard mental count. So the team would create a fake environment on campus to simulate the absolute worst scenarios you can come across at a blackjack table. They would blast music, have other players act as annoying Patreons and casino employees. The dealer would go as fast as possible. Then the players would have to accurately count cards and perform their role on top of
Under
that.
pressure.
If they could survive, they were finally allowed to play with real money. This is where the newly opened Foxwood Casino comes in. They would bring newly approved players there to test their skills once and for all. It was the final step in their card counting journey. If they played well enough at Foxwood, they become official members of the MIT Blackjack team. With the new team officially recruited and trained, it was time to start their run, but they had one last problem to solve. Casinos were more privy to this stuff than ever, and they needed a way to not get caught like Bill.
Yeah.
Now, you might imagine it was pretty hard for JP to write his program to simulate blackjack because coding is pretty hard to learn. Or at least you might think, because this is where today's sponsor comes in, Boot Dev. I went to school for computer science.
I did too.
Functions that I was learning, what I probably most impressed on, and it
throw up a random number
about doing it. Number two, defies the experience. That pays extremely took away, do without to put thousands of dollars to try out their course on off and end. In September 1992, the MIT Blackjack team finally kicked into overdrive. They weren't just playing blackjack, they were orchestrating legal weekend heists on the biggest casinos in the country. They had the math, the signals, the disguises, and $1 million bankroll on their side. On a Thursday afternoon, a dozen of the students were preparing for their first full-fledged trip to Sin City. One of the strictest team rules was that the money was always transported on your person. You never ever let the money and you become physically separated. That's because once before, a student returning from a big gambling trip and going straight into a practice session at MIT put their brown paper lunch bag under their chair. 6 a.m. the next morning, Kaplan got a phone call. "You won't believe what I've done," the student said. "You know, I just came back from my big run and I had $125,000 in a paper bag. Well, I left it in the classroom, totally forgot about it, and just ran back and it's not there." It took 6 months and an investigation by the Drug Enforcement Administration and the FBI before the team eventually got their money back. Turns out that a cleaner had picked it up and put it in his locker. These students were trusted with a ton of money.
That cleaner was about to retire, man.
To drink. For new players, it was a culture
He was gonna
shock
retire,
to go from campus
That's
to
unfortunate.
Sin City. They had to stay
I wish they would have
focused,
let him keep
and for the
it,
students, there
'cause
was
they
no
can make
problem.
more.
They were mature, responsible. They had prepared for a long time to even be given
He kind of earned
this
that, dude.
opportunity.
He was doing his job, bro. He was just doing his job. I'm not gonna lie to you. He was just doing his job. He was cleaning up a paper bag, found some money in there. Come on, man. 100 bands? Come on, he was doing his job, man.
They wanted to do well when they arrived. One of these students was Semyon Dukak. On campus, nobody would blink an eye at his usual turtleneck sweater, but out on his gambling trips, he'd be playing the part of a Russian arms dealer. That Thursday, Semyon headed out to Boston Logan Airport to catch an American West flight down to Las Vegas. The plan was to meet up with 4 other members at the Mirage Volcano around 10 p.m. that night, including Kate, who would be playing his fake girlfriend.
On my first trip to Vegas, I believe I actually flew out alone, and I met some people there. I remember that I had a heavy leather jacket with about $150,000 in cash in the pockets.
But when he arrived at the meeting spot, no one else was there. He realized something was wrong. After wandering the strip for over an hour, Semyon finally bumped into Kate. Turns out she had taken a later flight, but she wasn't sure about the other students. Either way, they quickly got to work. Joining the blackjack table as a couple, Semyon would quickly find an excuse to leave, asked to head to the bathroom. Then Kate would bet the minimum, $25 a hand, until the count was favorable. Semyon, who had been hovering for a while now, waiting for the secret signal, Kate, resting her chin on her left hand, knew that the count was now favorable. He rejoined the table and immediately started betting $5,000 a hand. This wasn't ideal to do with just 2 people. It's a little easier to attract attention. The pit bosses are looking for players who go from betting low to betting high to distinguish card counters. Ideally, they would have had 3 or 4 people, so the big player would have
so
looked
a person
like a
just
totally
pulling up,
random
you
player
can't
just
really
sitting
track
down
them.
that always
They just
bets
pull up
like
spinning
that, no
big?
matter what table they go to. But
don't
this was
know.
their first run. They were pretty confident that they were going to get away with this, and just from that single session, they turned a profit of $30,000. One of the casino hosts, noticing this, immediately approached them and said, "Hey, do you guys got plans for where you're staying tonight? Because we'd love to offer you one of our premium suites." See, big players in Vegas are treated like royalty. They want to keep them around at their casinos, especially if they win big, so they come back the next day and potentially lose it. Semyon and Kate were over the moon. By the end of the weekend, they were up over $100,000. On their flight back, they couldn't believe that they had actually beat the casino. With all their cameras and security and infrastructure, a couple of kids half their age had made out like bandits, collected a ton of stuff and free comps. The casino was none the wiser. There's dozens and dozens of stories like this. For JP, he knew that it was the law of large numbers that would make this work because they had so many people doing it. Hundreds of hands a day, thousands of hands a weekend. But it wasn't always sunshine and rainbows. Thanks to the expected mathematical variance, sometimes they lost and lost big despite having a good count. For Semyon, one night when the count was unusually high, he was betting 2 hands of $10,000 each. Still managed to lose a bunch of hands in a row. Within minutes, he was down $150,000, and worst of all, he had run out of chips. Now, he had more cash in his pockets, but he could only buy in for $30,000 without showing ID, and of course, he was playing under a fake alias. He couldn't risk revealing his real name, or he could get barred from the casino more easy, so he had to walk away from the table. Despite these sorts of losses, the math always worked out. By June 1st, 1993, the team was on fire with winnings totaling $439,000. The team's routine became fly in for Friday, gamble for a straight 48 hours, then Sunday night, party before catching a red-eye back to school for Monday. Then they'd hand off the winnings to whoever was responsible for collecting the cash. And in between these trips, they had all sorts of forms that they had to fill out. Remember, Strategic Investments was truly set up like a real company. They had very thorough paperwork. Players would need to remember how many shoes they counted, what the conditions of the game were, how many players were at the table, and of course, the money totals. All of this playing and betting data was later fed into a computer for analysis. This information was also used to determine how much they were paid. So they were paid for their playing time, but they also got a cut of the profits, which were totaled up every quarter. Finally, after over 10 years of adjustments in leadership and strategy, the MIT Blackjack team had hit its stride. Up to 30 players were playing in casinos all over the world every weekend. It got so crazy that to avoid suspicion, the players would always visit different casinos as much as possible, sometimes even flying to Europe or the Caribbean. And back at MIT, almost no one knew that these students were leading this double life. They had to keep it really tight. Some of their families didn't know, girlfriends didn't know, certainly other professors didn't know. They were the best students at MIT, but on the weekend, they were the top gamblers of the world. And because of the whole host system and how whales are treated at casinos, they had front row seats to all the big shows. They were staying in the best suites. Some of them would have swimming pools and jacuzzis in them. They were getting steak dinners at the best restaurants in the world. Crap, one of the students requested a private plane take him on a tour of the Grand Canyon, and another got his wedding fully paid for at Caesar Palace. By the later half of 1993, Strategic Investments was now just shy of $900,000 in profit. JP and the other co-founders weren't only counting their money, but they were proud to have put the entire team together. They were successful at last, but in the months ahead, as the team increased its winnings even more, it also increased something else, its profile. Casinos do not make losing money, so they go to great lengths to make sure that nobody is getting more than they should. Hundreds of cameras lining the gambling pit, tracking players' each and every move. Staff members are watching the high rollers like a hawk, and when the casino realizes that they're losing a lot but they're not sure how, they bring in the big guns, private investigators. Meet Andy Anderson. For years, the MIT players only knew him as the silver-haired man. He was a detective working for Griffin Investigations. Back in the 90s, they were the biggest name in private investigators specializing in the gambling industry. Every casino on the strip used them, and they would go out of their way to find people who were illegally cheating the casinos out of money. Usually they would catch people who were using sleight of hand to switch out dice during a game of craps, grease pens to mark cards, or people abusing computers hidden inside of their clothing. It was like a shoe computer, it was called, to track the count of cards. But the thing is, what the MIT kids were doing wasn't cheating or illegal. They were counting cards using their brain. They were just smart players, advantaged players. But legality didn't matter to casinos. Casinos are considered private businesses, so they can ban anyone they want for any reason. And with the help of Andy, they were hoping to figure out exactly who'd been taking them for hundreds of thousands of dollars. Andy's secret weapon was recognizing faces. He would go from casino to casino on the strip, find different players, learn who they are, and then try to distinguish who they were working with to get the count. Once he saw the same faces in several places, he would dig into their personal details, like the address sources they were using to claim comps, then cross-referenced them with others in the crew. Worse, their pictures and aliases were then published in something called the Griffin Book. This was a book that was periodically
like the bingo
released
book,
to keep
bro,
all casinos
for
up
all
to
the
date on
ninja,
threats to their
what was
profits.
it?
Essentially, when someone is repeatedly
The
caught
S-rated
for having an
ninja in the
unfair
bingo
advantage,
book.
their name and picture will be put in the Griffin Book. To make matters worse, Andy noticed that many of the addresses used to claim comps by these people were from Boston. But the biggest mistake, the team had written manuals on their strategy for reference. Andy eventually found one of these that a student mistakenly left behind. From all of this, he was able to eventually piece together that the largest card counting team the world had ever known had all come from MIT.
And one time later, we actually got a copy of the Griffin Book, and we are about 140 pages.
This is him
of
talking
the Griffin
about
Book, which is much more than that. At one point, we pretty much took over their book, generated a lot of business for them. And one day we were flipping through the thing, and we saw a picture of Mike. I said, Mike, that's a really good picture of you. Like, it looks like you posed for it. And he's like, all right, come here, look at this. He looks and he's like, oh, that's my yearbook picture. So what Griffin did, they actually posed as MIT students, got an MIT yearbook, and scanned in all the yearbook pictures of everyone on the team and everyone who went to MIT. It wasn't just the team members at one point.
Yearbook
They actually
pictures
scanned
is
in
crazy.
every single MIT student into their database of
Every
casino
single one?
desirables.
So to counter this, the team starts getting even more outlandish with their disguises.
One time we had John dressed up as a woman. Another time I think he was a woman and a nurse, and I was a guy in a wheelchair.
But it didn't matter. The team was still getting banned from casinos left and right. It got to the point where upon landing in the airport, they would be spotted and a fax would be sent out to all the casinos warning them that the team was in the area. And it wasn't just Las Vegas. They were getting made around the world.
Semyon and I went on a tour of Europe at one point and showed up at the casino at Monte Carlo and only lasted for, what, an hour? About an hour. And I'm pulled away by, some very nice-looking goons at Monte Carlo Casino.
Goons?
Don't let me go
Nice-looking goons?
Brought us behind a glass door, I think, into an office where they could send our pictures to the Griffin Detective Agency in Las Vegas to get us positively ID'd. All the time pretending that they did not know any English.
Wow.
And then searched our car, we're not sure for what,
Searched
and drove
the car?
us to the local jail where we ended up spending several hours. So I have a police record and officially am barred from ever re-entering the Principality of Monaco.
They stopped going to international casinos because of this. Since basically everyone on the team was either banned from multiple casinos on the Strip or plastered all over the Griffin Book, it became a lot harder for the team to make money. Worse, they had also started hemorrhaging money, losing hundreds of thousands of dollars. Nearly half of everything they had made in just a few months thanks to a brutal losing streak that had kicked off in the fall of '93. While this was within the
They're probably feeling the heat and
variance,
got sloppy.
it still made JP extremely stressed out that they would lose everything they worked so hard for. It didn't help that the team was also starting to slip through the cracks. Players who were now much closer to management in terms of skill were getting increasingly fed up with how it was run. Since the players only got their salary and about 10% of the profits, they felt like they were doing all the heavy lifting while the big investors took home most of the cash. JP eventually told John Chang and Bill Kaplan
exactly what was
he wanted
happening.
to be done, that it wasn't worth all the stress, that things would be different if they weren't losing so much money, but they were. They toyed with the idea of just letting JP drop out, having Semyon replace his role in leadership and continuing the team. But when Semyon decided not to take that position because of the growing dissatisfaction among team members, they decided it was time to close up shop. By December '93, Strategic Investments cashed everyone out, and that would be that. Except Semyon had other ideas.
What? What was he gonna do?
After 2 years, Strategic Investments was no more. But Semyon Dukak wasn't done gambling just yet. He went on to form a new team, Amphibian Investments. Players would become investors. The operation expanded through the mid-90s, eventually employing over 60 players across 5 cities. Their total winnings, reportedly over $4 million.
Alright,
The end of Strategic Investments also gave rise to the Reptiles, another spin-off team, whose story was later told in the book Bringing Down the House. In total, these teams spun off from the MIT legacy were responsible for over $6 million in losses to the casinos. But like all great teams, their time was limited. And after a few years, it all came crashing down. Most of the students returning to their original fields that they were studying for at MIT. But the legend lived on. Bringing Down the House sparked heated debate over its accuracy from team members, but it captivated readers and later audiences with the film 21, which introduced a new generation to the world of card counting. And casinos responded. They shuffled more often, they added automatic shufflers, they changed their rules, but the damage was done. The story had spread, books were written, movies were made, icons were born. The MIT Blackjack team inspired a new wave of advantage players determined to beat the system. The house today may be stronger, the odds tighter, but there's always new players stepping up to take their shot. Their stories, well, those
stepping
are for another
count
day,
on
so make
count
sure you
them
subscribe.
down. Say count them down, baby. Walk them down. Count down the casino. All right, with that being said, that's going to be it for this video. I hope you liked it. I enjoyed it. This is a cool little walk down memory lane because I did think about that movie. Seeing that movie, you know, it's a good one. But yeah, leave a like, comment, and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye.